King Adeyemi leaned back on his throne, yawning loudly as a chief spoke about something that bored him stupid. Probably moaning about taxes or something inconsequential to him, the king thought to himself as he stared out the window beside his throne, completely ignoring the speaker. For once, he was missing Madame Bimpe and briefly considered calling her to service him. Bimpe had been walking kinda funny since yesterday when she had spent the evening with General Seyi, so Adeyemi decided to give the woman a rest. The king was busy scanning the palace for a suitable replacement for Bimpe when his servant entered the conference room, interrupting the talkative chief. "The Queen of Dahomey has arrived," the servant announced loudly, practically shouting down the chief in his excitement. The interrupted chief glared at the servant, but was forced to bite his tongue as the king ordered him to return to his seat and for the queen to be shown in. Adeyemi's stomach was fluttering. He knew what he had asked of the queen, but was not sure if he had pushed his luck too far. He gave a short nod to General Seyi, who was seated across the room from him, just warning the brave soldier to be ready for any danger. And then the queen entered the room. The assembled chiefs and advisors gasped at her arrival. The queen was tall, even taller than the negotiator had been. She had to be close to 6.5 feet tall and would have dwarfed some of the soldiers in the palace. She had a powerful, athletic body that, although very muscular, had enough feminine curves to turn most of the heads in the court. The queen wore none of the trappings of her exalted rank. She was dressed very similar to every other female warrior, in fact. A short leather skirt and matching studded halter top. The only thing that set her apparel apart was the gold trim on the brown leather. Despite her fierce warrior nature and imposing build, the queen had the face of an angel. Her features were like those of a goddess, perfectly chiseled and flawless. She had long hair that was immaculately groomed, and she had the brightest eyes Adeyemi had ever seen. The queen strode confidently through the center of the throne room, directly towards King Adeyemi. She was flanked by 2 beautiful female soldiers, one of which Adeyemi recognized as the negotiator he had his way with earlier. Adeyemi looked wonderingly at the negotiator, trying to glean a clue as to whether or not the queen had agreed to his surrender terms. Unfortunately, the female soldier refused to meet his inquiring gaze, and he was left in the dark as to the intentions of the queen. The 3 women reached the foot of the raised platform on which King Adeyemi's throne sat. The 2 escorts halted there, but the queen immediately began to climb the short stairs leading up to the throne, not pausing to ask permission.
The chiefs gasped in surprise at the queen's boldness, and a few stood up, assuming the worst. A pair of soldiers that flanked Adeyemi's throne and acted as his bodyguards reached for their swords, intending to halt the queen, but Adeyemi stopped them. He swallowed nervously as the beautiful queen crossed the last few feet, separating them. Adeyemi had no idea if she had accepted the deal or was here to kill, but the gamble was quite exciting. The whole palace was on edge at the queen's audacious actions and lack of respect. Little did they know the king believed she was about to perform the ultimate act of subservience. Adeyemi smiled as the queen sunk to her knees at his feet, and a few of the chiefs even sighed audibly in relief. The startled gasps, however, returned as the queen reached towards Adeyemi. She began to worship him. Adeyemi began to laugh loudly, causing the already startled chiefs to gasp in surprise. He knew that his request was to submit to him, marry him, but first, worship him on her knees. As her 2 bodyguards moved to follow her out, the negotiator paused and turned to the king. "I believe our peace treaty is now sealed." The king smiled and nodded. The negotiator bowed slightly and then left, leaving the stunned nobles and a very happy and satisfied-looking king. Adeyemi trudged through the forest, stumbling on a tree root and stubbing his bare toe painfully. "Ah!" he screamed, limping slightly in pain. His filthy feet were bruised and battered, with several cuts on his bare soles. "How did all this happen?" he muttered, shivering slightly. The afternoon was getting colder, and the fact he was walking completely naked through the forest certainly didn't help things. It had not always been like this, Adeyemi contemplated to himself as he hiked onwards, yelping as his bare thigh brushed past a sharp twig, drawing a thin line of blood. Once, not so long ago, Adeyemi would never have imagined himself in such a position. Adeyemi had been king. No, he corrected himself. He was still king. A day earlier, King Adeyemi took his seat in the royal throne room, the throne of his forefathers. On his head rested a richly bejeweled golden crown, and around him sat his most loyal and trusted advisors. Or so he thought. "You took quite a risk, Your Highness," said Chief Oho, a gray-bearded old general from one of the villages in Adeyemi's kingdom. The advisor was referring to the bold demands that the king had made of the Queen of Dahomey when negotiating a peace treaty between their nations. Nonetheless, the king made a very beneficial settlement, cut in General Say, head of King Adeyemi's armies. "We keep all the lands we have captured, and as we speak, 100 Dahomey slaves are heading towards the city to ensure the peace treaty holds." "What are we going to do with 100 Dahomey slaves?" asked Oho. "The prisons are full as they are." "We are going to do whatever we want with them," snapped the king impatiently. If it weren't for Bimpi's talents, he would never have the tolerance for council meetings such as these. "They are slaves, not prisoners. I'm sure General Say wouldn't mind a pair of seductive Dahomey beauties. They will not put any pressure on our prisons." The king gave a soft sigh of pleasure. "Do you really think they will not retaliate?" asked the fat Chief Enitan, another of the king's advisors. "But if they do, then General Sei will crush them once again." "Without breaking a sweat," Sei confirmed with a grin. "I have a meeting with the High Priestess," continued the king. "We'll continue this discussion tomorrow." As the assembled nobles all filed out, the general took Bimpe by the upper arm and pulled her aside. "I need to talk with you," he whispered, glancing rather nervously in the direction of the king. Adeyemi was already on his way out the door, however. "What do you want?" Bimpe demanded of the general, her face showing her distaste. She had always detested Sei, and had hated him even more after the king had given her to the general for a night as a reward for his success in the war against the Dahomey. That night, Sei had ruthlessly used her to sate himself, showing no care for her own needs, merely using her as a receptacle. "I have a proposition for you," he told her, the glint of lust in his eyes easily apparent. "There's nothing you can offer me," Bimpe replied, almost spitting the words at him, her face a grimace as she remembered that night. "How would you like to be queen?" the general asked. "King Adeyemi will never marry me," Bimpe scoffed, wondering what the ugly soldier had in mind. The general grinned, his eyes unconsciously darting down to glance at Bimpe. "Who said anything about Adeyemi?" Bimpe's eyes widened as she realized what the general was suggesting. "You're not saying." "Not here," snapped Sei, suddenly silencing her. "Let's retire to my room." Bimpe hesitated for only an instant. The lovely noblewoman took the general's arm and let him lead her to his room so they could talk in private. "What do you have planned?" Bimpe asked as soon as they were alone in Sei's room. She felt a little uncomfortable there, remembering the last time she had been here when King Adeyemi had ordered her to warm the general's bed. "Tonight, my assassin will kill the king. I will invoke martial law and take control of the kingdom. With the support of the council, I will take the crown in the king's absence," the general told her. Bimpe's eyes widened slightly. "Tonight? Why trust me with this?" she asked him dubiously. "You hate the king even more than I want the crown. He humiliates you in front of the council every day." even in front of the palace and even in front of servants, the general replied. Plus, I need support from the council to get the crown, and both Chief Enatan and Oho are both spineless. Bimpei nodded slowly. This is treason, she murmured, stating the obvious. The general remained silent, watching the lovely noblewoman carefully. Bimpei frowned. What do I get out of this? The general chuckled. He had her now. I am the one taking all the risk, but nevertheless, when I am king, you will be my queen. Bimpei's heart soared. Queen? She smiled broadly. Queen Bimpei? I like the sound of that. Of course, it would mean she would have to give herself to the general, but at least she would not be treated like some piece of meat as she was currently. So we have a deal? Sei asked eagerly. Yes, I will convince the council to support your claim when the king is dead, Bimpei agreed. And you will become my queen? Pressed the general, stepping close to Bimpei, his hands resting on her hips and drawing her closer. Yes, I will be your queen, she replied. Excellent, he said. We should celebrate and seal the deal. Here it comes, Bimpei thought to herself. Yes, she said with a nod. She gasped slightly. The king is with the priestess tonight. Is it wise to attack tonight? Bimpei asked as she was shoved onto the bed. My assassin knows how to deal with the priestess, the general explained. Brilliant, Lady Bimpei complimented him. Tomorrow you will be a queen, murmured Sei. Meanwhile, in the royal bedroom, Isanian, high priestess of Yamoja, sat astride her king, having relations with him. You know that my spiritual power is weakened through such carnal activities, Isanian cautioned her king. Who cares? You're a great woman, grunted Adeyemi in reply. One day you may need my power, your highness, Isanian breathed, but before the king could reply, she leant forward, cutting off any answer. Adeyemi drew her closer. Suddenly, the door to the royal bedroom burst open. The limp body of the king's bodyguard slumped through the burst-open doorway, a throwing knife embedded in his forehead. Assassin! Yelled the king, hoping to summon any nearby guards. Run! Yelled Isanian, stepping in front of her king, her gown still gaping wide open as the attacker entered the room. Oh no! Screamed the king, looking left and right for a getaway. Adeyemi's heart leapt into his throat as he saw his assailant for the first time. The killer was dressed from head to toe in a deep, blood-red robe and carried a wide-bladed sword. It was an Ardo, one of the deadly tribes of expert assassins from Fulani, feared throughout the kingdom and known to never fail to execute their mark. Adeyemi looked desperately around for an escape as his semi-naked priestess stepped towards the Ardo to defend her king. The only exit from the room was blocked by the assassin, so Adeyemi, seeing no alternative, started to climb out of the window, hoping to cling to the ledge outside while Isanian dealt with the assassin or his guards arrived. The Ardo hesitated a moment, sizing up the dark-skinned beauty that was between him and his target. Isanian's hands slowly started to trace an almost hypnotic pattern in the air, and her lips started to move. Ardo's eyes widened as he suddenly seemed to realize just who the priestess was. As the assassin slashed out with his sword, there was a loud bang and a sudden bright red light. A small shockwave rocked the entire palace, and Isanian was thrown backwards to the floor. There was a scream from outside the window. Seconds later, 4 guardsmen burst into the room to see Isanian lying on the floor in front of a burnt husk of human bones. Captain Olabisi, head of the palace guards, was at their front. He took one look at the scorched bones and leveled the point of his sword at the dazed priestess. "Arrest her," he growled, "and get the general." Adeyemi stepped out of the bedroom window onto the very thin stone ledge that ran around the frame. "Ooh," he muttered as a sudden gust of wind rocketed at him, almost throwing him off the ledge. The king gingerly peered down and immediately wished he hadn't. He was about 40 feet above the town, standing on a small, crumbling stone ledge. Inside the bedroom, the assassin and priestess were facing off, and Adeyemi edged sideways, trying to get as far out of the reach of the killer as he could. He just hoped that the guards had heard the commotion and were on their way up. Suddenly, there was a massive bang, and a bright light exploded out of the bedroom window. The entire tower rocked in the blast, and Adeyemi was thrown off. "Oh!" he cried as the ledge was torn out from under his feet. His stomach leapt into his throat as he fell towards the city below at an alarming rate. The buildings below swiftly rose to meet his falling body, and he crashed painfully through a thatched roof. Then everything went white. "It wasn't me, that's not the king," protested Iseniyin as two guards manacled her hands behind her back. "I suppose the king just disappeared then," scoffed Captain Olabisi. "No, he's outside the window," replied Iseniyin fearfully. "Oh, right," Olabisi replied sarcastically. He kicked the burnt pile of bones with the toe of his boot. "And I suppose this pile of bones is the servant?" "No, you don't understand. He's an assassin." "I saved the king," argued the priestess. With her hands chained, she was unable to use her powers to free herself. Olabisi laughed at her excuse. "Take her to the prison," he ordered. As the guards dragged away the protesting priestess, Olabisi turned and glanced out the window. There was no obvious sign of anyone on the ledge or the rooftops below. But Olabisi had a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. "Get a squad together and search the buildings below," Olabisi ordered the remaining guard. "For the assassin?" asked the guard, surprised that his captain had believed the priestess's feeble-sounding excuse. "For the king," Olabisi corrected. It took Adeyemi almost a full minute to realize that he wasn't dead. He shrugged aside the whiteness, which turned out to be a bedsheet, and found himself in a strange place. She gasped in shock at the sight of Adeyemi. Adeyemi's hand shot out, clamping over her mouth and stifling her scream just as it started to burst from her lungs. "Silence, fool," he snapped at the wide-eyed laundry girl. "I'm the king." He gave her a moment to calm down before finally releasing his hand from her mouth. "King Adeyemi?" she gasped in amazement.